afternoon, everybody. So we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Thad Graham. I am the FSI Victim Services Education Specialist. And we are going to be continuing our discussion from last week with a Human Trafficking 201 discussion. So last week we kind of defined what human trafficking was, looked at a lot of statistics on human trafficking. This week we're going to take a little bit further in-depth look. So we are going to briefly define human trafficking again, as well as review some of the information we talked about last week. We are going to look at some key terms and define in specific a few key terms and discuss them. We are going to give a further discussion on human trafficking in the internet, specifically looking at social media and other platforms like Zoom. And then we are going to compare domestic violence and human trafficking, and then that should end our discussion for today. So as we talked about previously, human trafficking is broken into two parts. We have sex or labor trafficking. Now, it does not matter whether we're talking about sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Both are considered modern day slavery, and both are gained through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Like I said, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about sex trafficking and commercially selling someone for sex, or labor trafficking where we are using someone as basically slave labor. Both are defined by the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain something. And that truthfully is important. For human trafficking to be proven, to be carried out or prosecuted in a court of law, you have to have one of those elements, if not more, of force, fraud, or coercion. All three of those elements, or at least one of those elements, have to be proven for human trafficking to take place or to be proven. Now, there is one exception with human trafficking and the force, fraud, or coercion, and that is when it comes to a commercial sexual act with someone under the age of 18. A child cannot sell themselves commercially for sex. A child cannot prostitute themselves. If someone is selling themselves for sex and they're under the age of 18, that is sex trafficking. Someone is trafficking them. Force, fraud, or coercion does not have to be proven in that instance. That magic number of are they 18 years of age or older? If they are under the age of 18 and they are engaging in a commercial sexual act, it is sex trafficking, and therefore it is human trafficking. Now, we also discussed CSEC, or the commercial sexual exploitation of children. Now, for CSEC to occur, we have to have a financial gain or commercial exchange, and it doesn't just have to be sex trafficking or the prostitution of a child. The commercial sexual exploitation of a child does encompass everything from child pornography, sex trafficking and prostitution, and what we're seeing an increase in nowadays, especially with COVID-19, which is the live streaming of sexual abuse. So this is where individuals are using platforms like Zoom, like Facebook chat, like other methods of online chatting to actually live stream the sexual abuse and rape of children for paying customers. Also, we want to remember that the commercial sexual exploitation of children can include familial trafficking. So it doesn't just have to be someone that they don't know as the trafficker for CSEC. It can be mom, dad, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, stepdad, stepmom, grandma, grandpa, who are selling them and prostituting them, or who is live streaming this abuse, or who is selling that child pornography. And then we also talked about familial trafficking. Now, like we just looked at, familial trafficking does include the commercial sexual exploitation of children. Remember, all familial trafficking is either sex trafficking or labor trafficking, where the pimp or the trafficker, the person who is taking advantage of the other human being, is related to the victim. It's mom, it's dad, it's aunt, it's uncle, it's stepmom, it's stepdad, it's brother, it's sister, it's grandma, it's grandpa. That is the person who is the trafficker. What exactly is occurring breaks it down even further. Is it the commercial sexual exploitation of children? And then is it trafficking? Or are they doing it to an adult victim who's 18 years of age or older? If so, then is it sex trafficking or labor trafficking? Is it possible that they're using a family member as an indentured servant? Or is it possible that they're forcing a family member to work in the family business with little to no pay, where they've incurred a debt? If so, then it's labor trafficking. One of the things to remember with labor trafficking as well is it is notoriously hard to identify and to prosecute unless we're talking about an extreme circumstance. Oftentimes, it is very hard to prosecute labor trafficking unless it is these large scale or very extreme cases. So we're going to look at a list of key terms. Now, we're not going to look at or talk about all of these key terms. There is a handout that has all of these key terms, plus a few more in the handout section for you as well. There are a few more added as well. Most of these key terms come from a book that is published. It's called Renting Lacey, A Story of America's Prostituted Children by Linda Smith. Most of these key terms come directly from In the Life. So these are key terms that these victims saw every day. Like I said, there's a few more added in there as well, and it is available in PDF format in the handout section for you. So we are going to highlight a couple to start out with. So we have two different types of trafficker or pimp. In previous discussion, we discussed in further what we define a pimp as, or what we define a trafficker as. And we identified that truthfully, anybody can be a trafficker. All it takes is someone who is willing to take advantage of the vulnerabilities or risks of another individual. So when we define that further, we have two different types of pimp or trafficker. We have the finesse pimp or the Romeo pimp, and we have the guerrilla pimp or the guerrilla. Oftentimes during the recruitment phase, you're going to see the finesse pimp or the Romeo pimp. It is the most common when it comes to type of trafficker that there is. Now, this is someone who prides themselves on controlling others primarily through psychological manipulation. He may shower his victims with affection and gifts, like I said, especially during that recruitment phase, but the threat of violence is always present. Once the trafficker has lured this victim in with the promises of love and affection and gifts, and making them feel like they're the only person in the world, that they truthfully have a relationship, well, now they can control them psychologically with that psychological manipulation and with the threat of violence and force. A guerrilla pimp, or guerrilla on the other hand, is a pimp or trafficker who controls his victims almost entirely through physical violence and force. So this is someone who is not going to use affection and psychological manipulation. They're going to use force and violence and coercion, where if they're not threatening to beat you up or they're threatening to beat up the people you care about, they're going to be violent in other ways. So there are a ton of different terms here. I do want to talk about the term on the top, which is automatic. This is a term denoting the victim's routine when her pimp is out of town, in jail, or otherwise not in direct contact. So if a pimp is out of commission, they are in jail for another crime. Maybe they're in jail for the trafficking of their other victims. Maybe they're on vacation. Maybe they're who knows what. If they're out of town, these victims are expected to continue with an automatic and predetermined routine. This is a specific set of routines that includes continuing to traffic themselves, continuing to be a victim and to sell themselves for sex, even without that trafficker on site to force them to do it. They are so controlled and so psychologically manipulated that they understand that even when the trafficker is not here, if I do not go out and make my quota for the day, there is going to be punishment when he gets back. There's going to be punishment when he gets out of jail. And a lot of times, the money that they're making during this time is going to go towards getting them out of jail. It's going to go towards paying that trafficker's release. It's going to go to paying their bail. It's going to go into their account so that they can purchase stuff from the commissary. They're still not seeing that money, even with the trafficker out of town. On the bottom, exit fee. This is the money a pimp would demand from a victim who is thinking about trying to leave. It will be an exorbitant sum to discourage her from leaving. Most traffickers aren't going to want their victims to leave. To them, they are a business. They've put time and money into making this person a victim. They do not want them to leave. If they are discussed about the opportunity or possibility of leaving, they are going to have to pay that trafficker often an exorbitant amount of money to buy themselves out. So one of the terms in there was branding, and this is actually pulled directly from our FSI Victim Services Facebook page. And these are some common branding tattoos that you can or may see when it comes to traffickers. Remember, they do not consider these victims to be anything other than property. Therefore, they are going to make sure that they know whose property they are. And when it comes to property, this term really goes along with that process. It's called choosing up. It's the process by which a different pimp takes ownership of a victim. Victims are instructed to keep their eyes on the ground at all times. So when a victim is in the presence of another trafficker or another pimp, they're not allowed to look at them. According to tradition, if they make eye contact with that trafficker, she is choosing him to be her pimp. If the original pimp wants the victim back, he must pay a fee to the new pimp. When this occurs, he will force the victim to work harder to replace the money that was lost in the transaction. These victims are not even allowed to make eye contact with a trafficker or another trafficker that isn't their own. If they do, then it's considered them choosing up. They're just property. and they can be bought and sold back and forth with the leisure of the victim, of the pimp, of the trafficker. A couple more here. Kitty Stroll is an unfortunate one. It's an area known for prostitution that features younger victims. As we know, unfortunately, children entering the life often enter between the ages of 12 and 14. Boys often enter at a younger age, 12 or younger. And unfortunately, when dealing with familial trafficking, we know that these children are going to be raped and victimized even younger, anywhere from 5 years of age down to birth for some. So kiddie stroll is something that is very common when it comes to trafficking. A quota, I used this term earlier. It is a set amount of money that a trafficking victim must make each night before she can come home. Quotas are often set between $300 and $2,000, depending on the area. If the victim returns without meeting the quota, she is typically beaten and sent back out to the street to earn the rest. Quotas vary according to geographic region, local events, etc. Remember, human trafficking does follow large events. So large sporting events, for example, Penn State football in this area does increase the amount of human trafficking that is occurring in this area. One of the terms I think we skipped that I didn't cover see it's here, is a circuit. This is a series of cities among which prostituted people are moved. It's very common for these circuits to use pre-existing public transport like trains. So for our area, we have train services that go between ourselves and other major cities like Harrisburg. That would be a great way to move these victims without them, needing to be physically moved by the trafficker themselves. Track is an area of town known for prostitution activity. This can be a block, this can be a couple blocks, this can be just a section of town where trafficking is known to occur. A few more key term highlights here. We have seasoning. This is a combination of psychological manipulation, intimidation, gang rape, sodomy, beatings, deprivation of food or sleep, isolation from friends or family and other sources of support, as well as threatening or holding hostage of a victim's children. Seasoning is designed to break down a victim's resistance and ensure compliance. You'll often hear people say, well, why didn't the victim leave? You'll hear this when it refers to domestic violence, and you'll hear it when it comes to human trafficking as well. A lot of times these victims, especially if it's a familial trafficking victim and they're a child, they're going to continue to go to school. They're going to continue to have a fairly normal life, but at the same time, they're going to be a victim of sex trafficking as well. There is a lot of psychological manipulation and abuse that goes into making sure these victims stay compliant even when they are not in the presence of the pimp, of the trafficker. They understand that if they don't do as they're supposed to, there will be consequences. And a lot of times with the Romeo pimp tactic, for example, they are in love with the trafficker. This is the first person that has shown them kindness, that has shown them love, and they really do believe that they have a relationship with that person. The game or the life, I've used this term a couple times, and this is the subculture of prostitution, complete with roles, a hierarchy of authority, and language. It's referring to the act of pimping as the game, gives the illusion that it can be a fun and easy way to make money, when the reality is it is much harsher. Women and girls will say they've been in the life or they've been involved in prostitution for a while. Just like any other, business or subsection, prostitution and human trafficking does have their own key terms to kind of help differentiate themselves from people who don't understand the life. So previously, we talked a little bit about the internet and human trafficking. And when we talked about that, we talked about the fact that social media is the #1 place for predators to find their victims. We also said that 75% of victims report being sold online. There are 150,000 new escort ads posted online every day, and that 1 in 4 victims who were advertised online reported more than 10 buyers per day. So when we broke that down, we said that on average, 1 in 4 victims, 25% of victims, are being raped 10 times or more each and every day. And we talked about how much that can have a toll on a victim and why that these victims require so much more work and so much more interdisciplinary help than other victims of domestic violence or sexual assault. We talked about social media being used by traffickers to recruit victims, to proliferate their trafficking operations, and to control victims through restricting their social media access. That's something we actually didn't talk about, is where the trafficker will actually impersonate the victim or spread lies and rumors about them online to continue with the manipulation and control of that individual. So the University of Toledo performed a study, and they found that the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute also strongly support the fact that social media is increasingly being used utilized as a medium to contact, recruit, and sell children online for sex. So let's take a further look into social media and recruitment. The National Human Trafficking Hotline has recorded recruitment in all types of sex and labor trafficking on all social media platforms. So if there's a social media platform, they have recorded it being used for the proliferation of sex and labor trafficking. Some of the most common, of course, are going to be the most common applications in social media that children are on. So TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and even things like Facebook, WhatsApp, Tinder, Grindr, Kik, and those online dating sources and sites, as well as Zoom, like I talked about before, can be used for the recruitment and proliferation of trafficking. Traffickers may build an intimate relationship with the victim through social media or advertise fake or deceptive job opportunities. Recruiters of traveling sales crews even post brazen photos of daily profits to entice potential victims. And agricultural labor recruiters may advertise for U.S. visa contracts, providing someone who is an illegal alien with the opportunity to gain U.S. citizenship or gain a U.S. visa. Down on the bottom, you'll see a very disturbing photo, and this is an actual photo from a Zoom meeting where the child in the middle is being sold, and he is going to be sexually exploited online, live via Zoom for all of the gentlemen who are watching. Once again, I pulled this directly from our social media as well. As you can see, all people are vulnerable, and this is just some more recruitment methods for the recruitment of these victims. Flattery, lies, and manipulation, of course, are one of the main recruitment methods. But one of the major issues that we are seeing now, especially in COVID-19, is meeting those basic needs: shelter, food, and clothing. There is a very large food insecurities problem right now with a lot of young people. So the ability to have those basic needs met is, of course, a lure for them to become victims. So social media and trafficking continued. The sale of sex using apps and social media is less blatant than on traditional commercial sex websites. That being said, it is an expanding concern, and it is expanding each and every day. Traffickers use social media against victims when they isolate them from their support systems by restricting or heavily monitoring social media use. Traffickers may also use social media to impersonate victims, spread damaging rumors, distribute intimate images, or stalk a victim's account activity, even after they have left the trafficker. Remember, this is all about manipulation and control. If a trafficker cannot manipulate you through force or through coercion, then they're going to do it through fraud, make you look bad. They're going to blackmail you. They're going to force you to do as they wish. Continuing with social media and trafficking, traffickers not only have immediate access to their victims, but they also have immediate access to a wealth of information about the victim. So unfortunately, social media allows people, and especially traffickers, to know what their victims look like, to know what their interests are, whether they're happy or not, where they are, who they spend time with, along with a lot of other information. This allows the trafficker to manipulate their responses to what this person wants to see or hear. It allows the trafficker to truthfully become what the victim wants or needs at that time to take advantage of them and to be able to eventually sell them for sex. Traffickers pretend to understand them. So these girls who are feeling not understood and not loved and not beautiful, these guys are very good at sort of pretending that they are all of these things, and they really understand them. So traffickers use strategic responses like, I think you're beautiful. I'll encourage you to show your body, or I'll protect you, to get the victim's guard down, to establish that trust, and to allow the manipulation and the psychological manipulation to occur so that they can then take advantage of the victim. So take a minute, look at this photo, and tell me if this photo looks normal to you. I would hope you said no, because it's a weird looking photo. So why is it a weird looking photo? Well, because it is not normal for us to see grown adults to be just hanging around at a playground by themselves and possibly playing with children that are not theirs or that they don't know. It's not socially acceptable for a grown man to just be hanging out at a playground and playing with children. So if that is true, then why is this so normal? Why is it common for grown men and women to be playing online video games with children, where they have direct contact with them through the internet? So another question for you to think about: where is your console located? So if you have children and you have a video game console, where is it located? Is it in the living room? Or is it more likely located in their bedroom, where they're alone and you have no way to physically monitor what they're doing? Why do I ask? Well, because unfortunately, traffickers are using this knowledge, and specifically video games like Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, Call of Duty, where they know that there are going to be a larger proportion of children, to gain access to these children directly in their bedrooms, most likely, where they have a headset on and they can start to communicate and talk to them without interruption or interference from an adult. Traffickers are smart, and they understand that video games are another way to manipulate and to begin to seek out victims online. Last thing we're going to talk about here is the link between domestic violence and human trafficking. So just in case you need a definition, domestic violence is a pattern of coercive behavior used by one person to gain power and control over another in an intimate or familial relationship. Also known as abuse, domestic violence or DV, battery, intimate partner violence or IPV, family, spousal relationship violence, or dating violence. It is often characterized by emotional abuse, physical abuse, stalking, which we'll be talking about next week, sexual violence, financial abuse, as well as verbal abuse. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced physical abuse from an abusive intimate partner. So many of us have seen this before. This is the power and control wheel. This was developed to show the cyclical events and how power and control is used to manipulate and keep control of a victim when it comes to domestic violence. What many of us may not have seen is a very similar one when it comes to both sex and labor trafficking. The link between domestic violence and human trafficking, of course, comes down to both power and control. Someone who wants to sell another individual for sex wants to gain power and control over that individual to be able to do as they wish with them. Someone who is an abusive partner who is going to use power and control to manipulate them, to physically beat them, and to control them really is no different. There is just a fine line between them. And as you can see, when we put them side by side, they're nearly identical. So let's take a few minutes and look at the different types and breakdown for that power and control wheel of human trafficking. So using privilege. How do traffickers use privilege? Well, of course, they're going to treat victims like a servant. They're going to use gender, age, or nationality to suggest their superiority. Remember, most of these victims are going to be under the age of 18. They don't have the opportunities that someone who is older has. So they're going to use that as a way to keep themselves superior over those younger victims. They use certain victims to control others through coercion or through the bottom bitch. That victim who has been in a life long enough that they're now the right-hand man or woman of the trafficker. They're going to use that victim to control other victims. They're also going to hide or destroy important documents. Remember, these victims are not going to have free range or the ability to move or to travel on their own. Everything about their life is going to be controlled, including their important documents. Whether it's a visa, whether it's a driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, they are not going to have control of those documents. Next, we have denying, blaming, and minimizing. Of course, the abuser is going to make light of the abuse or exploitation. Remember, this victim is not a person, they're property. And this is absolutely fine in that trafficker's mind. They're going to deny that anything illegal or exploitative is occurring. Remember, to them, it's just a business. They're an entrepreneur. They're doing what they're supposed to do to make money and to make themselves a business person. They are going to place blame on the victim for the trafficking situation. It is not their fault that they're being trafficked. It's the victim's fault. Next, we have intimidation. Harms other victims, children, or pets. There is a family structure like we talked about before, and other victims are like the sister or family that a lot of times these victims don't have. It is very common for the trafficker to either harm or threaten to harm those victims as punishment for another victim. Also, it is common for a victim to be forced into pregnancy so that the trafficker has another way to control them. The trafficker can display or use weapons, can destroy property, and also can lie about police investigations. Economic abuse, it creates a debt that can never be repaid. You'll see this a lot of times in both sex and labor trafficking, where if someone is homeless, they don't have a place to stay, the trafficker will give the victim a place to stay, will just let them be a nice person. They can come stay with them. After a few days of them staying there, using resources, eating, showering, sleeping, using the electricity, they'll say that the victim needs to pay them back. The victim, of course, doesn't have any money as they're homeless, but don't worry, they have a way that they can pay them back. Remember that these victims are not going to be able to keep the money that they've earned. Of course, all money, or at least the majority of the money, is going to go to the trafficker. They're not going to have access to the finances, and they are going to be limited to what resources the trafficker allows. And that is very, very common as well when you look at domestic violence. Oftentimes, the victims of domestic violence are not going to be able to keep the money that they have earned if they're allowed to work at all. They're going to have very limited access to the finances and are only going to be given a small amount of money for purchasing groceries or to do other things. Next, we have coercion and threats. Of course, there are going to be threats to harm the victim or the victim's family. There are going to be threats to expose or shame the victim. You'll see this a lot of times with younger victims. If a younger victim has possibly sent some photos of themselves that were nude or very close to being nude, you'll see that they are threatened that those photos or videos will be exposed. Threats to report to police or immigration. We also have physical abuse, of course, shoves, slaps, hits, punches, kicks, or being strangled. Burns, brands, or tattoos. They can also be denied food and water, exposed to harmful chemicals, forced into pregnancy and or the termination of a pregnancy. And you can also see where traffickers will induce drug addiction as a means of control. Just a few more here. We have emotional abuse. Oftentimes, these victims are going to be humiliated in front of others. They're going to be called names. They're going to have mind games played on them and gaslighting occurring. They are going to make the victim feel guilt or blame for their situation. They're going to convince the victim that the trafficker is the only one who cares about them. Remember, this Romeo pimp tactic that it's them against the world. That trafficker, that pimp, is the one that truly cares about them, and no one else will be able to care or love them like they do. And you'll see that in domestic violence situations as well, where the abuser will often convince the victim that no one's going to care about them. No one could care about you. Look at you. You're useless. The same thing happens for trafficking victims as well. Sexual abuse, it uses sexual assaults as a punishment or means of control. It forces the victim to have sex with multiple times a day with strangers. Of course, we're talking about rape or sexual assault. Treats the victim as an object for monetary gain, and normalizes sexual violence and the act of selling sex. Okay, so of course, we didn't talk about everything as well. We're going to look at some victim assistance quickly and then let you go on your way. So we've looked at this before, and we want to point out the importance of this again. The needs of the victims of trafficking are among the most complex of crime victims, often requiring a multidisciplinary approach to address the severe trauma and medical needs, as well as immigration and other legal concerns, safety concerns, shelter, and other basic daily needs, as well as financial hardships. These victims need more help than other victims that we work with. So it is very important that here in Blair County, we continue to support HEART and the multidisciplinary approach that they are going to bring forth. Also, if you believe that anybody is a victim of human trafficking, or you need to, or you believe that human trafficking is going on in your area, please feel free to reach out to our victim services helpline. Or if you know someone who's in a domestic violence situation, please make sure they have our phone number, 814-944-3585. That number is answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We would be happy if you call either our helpline advocate or one of our on-call advocates. If you don't feel safe calling, or the victim doesn't feel safe calling, of course, you can now text that number, 814-944-3585. It's free and confidential. Once again, it's 24/7 access to an advocate, and that is through, once again, text message. You don't have to physically call if it is not safe, or you don't feel like it is safe to call. Family services information. Of course, we're located at 2022 Broad Avenue. We also have an office in the courthouse for CPO and PFAs. So if you need a civil protective order, the ladies there can help you as well. The family shelter or teen shelter as well. Phone numbers are below. Of course, you can find us on Facebook. If you have any questions, I will hang out in the chat for a few more minutes. This one was a little bit longer than most, but I will happily hang out in the chat for a few minutes if you have any questions. Resources are available as well as those handouts in the handout section as well. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Like I said, I'll hang out in the chat for a few more minutes. If not, have a wonderful day. And I hope